I haven't done this with somebody with me in real life yet.
Really? I'm the first in real life interview.
Yeah, I've been.
Wait, one thing. I don't really.
In real life.
I can give an elevator pitch for me, but I'm not sure if that's that interesting.
We'll find out.
Okay.
We'll find out. I love seeing how people describe themselves.
You can always cut it.
I'll keep it.
Okay.
Okay. Welcome back to Embody Radio, the premier podcast for high-performing individuals, helping you learn how to embody your happiest, healthiest, highest self. Today, we are here for our first in-person interview of the relaunch. No pressure. No pressure at all. Today, we are interviewing one of my very best friends. This is David Rosales. David, how does one describe David? I'll just describe how we met. So David and I met at Amanda's birthday in 2021. Actually, no, we met at a speaking event.
Yeah, Emily was speaking.
Yeah,
so I actually saw Emily speak before I ever talked to Emily.
Remind me what your first impression of that was.
I was like, well, I don't remember what I say. I was like, damn,
was
this is a bad bitch.
Oh,
yeah,
thanks.
I was like, this is a strong, powerful woman for sure.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. But we met at a speaking event. My first memory of David comes from a hockey background. My first memory of David is David teaching me hockey terms. But in the time since then, David has become one of my best friends. David is one of the smartest people I know. One of the most climate conscious people I know. One of the most adventurous people I know. So we're going to get into a lot of shit today. So David, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Emily.
You're so welcome. For everybody that doesn't know who you are.
Yeah, so this is exciting for me. And we did meet. So I have kind of phases where you talk about certain things, you know, how like life works like that. And I think about language a lot. I'm sure we'll talk about languages and like and probably writing later. And I think hockey, the hockey world, if you're a fan of like Letterkenny or Shoresy, you've gotten like a glimpse of like how hockey players talk. But when I met Emily, I just happened to be talking about how if you want to talk like a hockey player, we kind of have like our own language. And when you meet someone who talks like that, there's like that instant bond, and that's kind of what language can do. But one of the things I think I mentioned was if you want to know someone's nickname, if they're on a hockey team, you take the first syllable of their last name and you either just leave that or you add E at the end or you add at the end. So my last name is Rosales. So my hockey friends back home or from every team I've ever played on all call me Rosie. One of my best friends, his name's Jensen Dodge, and so we either just call him Dodge or we call him Dodger.
Aww.
That's kind of how it goes. So you'd be Dunk or Dunksy.
I like that one. Or that was cute.
Probably Dunksy or Dunksies.
That is so cute. It would be
like that. And so hockey totally we have our own little language.
I love that.
And our own verbs. And I could say something to a hockey player, and if you don't play hockey, you would have no idea what I'm saying.
Teach us a hockey term right now.
Okay, one of my favorite verbs that we use in hockey is the verb to wheel. It's like wheels. And it has two meanings. So the first one is while you're playing hockey, if you need to go fast, you're like wheel. It's like, hey man, when you get that puck, just wheel it, which means just go, just like skate.
Okay.
So it's kind of a synonym for skate, but again, kind of how language is really cool. It's different than skate. It means like skate aggressively.
Yeah.
So instead of saying skate as fast as you need to, which takes like 6 words, because language
evolves.
You
need more time, or you need less time to say in sports. You have to be able to say more and less.
And this is kind of how like we might talk about this later too, how language evolves from culture. And so hockey culture now has our own verb, which is wheel, which is like a certain type of skate.
Yeah.
So it's as if English had another verb for skate, and it does in hockey language.
Yeah.
So, and it also means wheel also means like to pick up a girl. So this is kind of, I mean, hockey, as much as I love hockey language, like hockey does have definitely like a misogynistic history and something that I think our language can evolve out of. But you know, it can go both ways. So it's like, oh, did you wheel her last night? Means like, did you hook up? Yeah. So there's some obviously like not great parts of hockey culture, obviously. But I think wheel is definitely an interesting word that we have.
Yeah. The first one he ever taught me was wagon.
Wagon. Yeah.
What's that one again? I forget.
So wagon usually
it's like a unit.
Usually refers to a team. So like, okay, the New York Rangers, they're a wagon this year. Like they're super good. Like,
but it's only positive.
Only positive.
It's not a bad wagon.
No, not in a bad way. It's like they're a wagon. They're a total wagon.
Love that.
Wagon.
Love that.
Yeah.
Starting off with so much learning.
That's hockey.
I love this. So you still have to introduce yourself.
Yeah. So my name's David, otherwise known as Emily's friend. I
think you're firstly known as David.
Well, I assume to your audience because your audience might know me from just being on Emily's stories every now and then.
From Tulum, from the iconic Spanish lessons in Tulum.
And I'm a writer. I'm a copywriter. I'm a language nerd. I'm really just one of those people with a job that's, hard to explain to my grandparents and
aren't we all?
Yeah, I think probably a lot of us out here. And what I really love is learning and writing, and that obviously those are two very broad areas, which means that I end up thinking about and talking about and working on all different kinds of things. And I don't love the term polymath, one, because I'm 24 and don't actually know that much, but two, I think it's kind of, I don't know, it just sounds kind of snobby, but I'm just a guy who likes to know
learn
stuff.
stuff.
Yeah, I like to learn stuff. That's kind of my thing.
David, the guy that likes to learn stuff.
Yeah.
What a compelling bio.
I put zero thought into it before we
I love that. That was a great off the cuff. That's amazing. Okay, so were you a lifelong learner? Did you always love learning?
That's a good question. I think I had a natural affinity towards learning. I actually really liked school. In 4th grade, when we were the big dogs of elementary school, we could stay in our classrooms during lunch, and my class in particular, we had a big chess culture, and we would play chess every day at lunch. And I remember just like loving that experience of playing and the frustration of blundering pieces and then learning how to do it better and all of these things. But definitely as I got older is when I became even more of a lifelong learner. And I think the biggest turning point for that was when I was 18, I went to Barcelona for the summer. Now, some more context on me. My father, he was born in a small country in Central America called El Salvador. And so he grew up speaking Spanish, but he moved to the U.S. when he was 5. And so Spanish is his first language, but he speaks English perfectly, newscaster English, no problems at all. But my mom is a white girl from Massachusetts. And so my dad's having English be his main language and my mom not speaking Spanish means that growing up, I only spoke English. And I was super self-conscious about it. So if anybody...
The whole time or like once you got older?
No, even honestly when I was like... I remember being 5 or 6 or 7. And I remember... My dad would be in our elementary school classroom for whatever, like picking me up from school, and he'd be like talking on the phone in Spanish. And I remember I have this vivid memory in 1st grade of a girl going, "What are those weird sounds your dad's making, David?" And being like, "It's another language." And I thought it was cool. And then she was like, "Can you do that?" And I was like, "No, I can't." I was like, "I'm not cool enough for that."
Dave's like, "I'm not getting chicks because I can't speak Spanish."
No, yeah, and so that's how that kind of started my like adolescent long insecurity about.
It always starts with the girl. Always starts with the girl.
And when I was in 8th grade, my family hosted. I'm from a small town in Vermont. This is important, sort of. I'm from a small town in Vermont.
I literally, and this is all because of David.
Vermont.
I never knew I would know so many people from Vermont. Like I know like 3 people from Vermont, but that's 3 more than I thought. I would ever know
me and
from
2 of
Vermont.
my friends.
Yeah.
And
Ben and Jerry.
I
don't like know them, but we have an intimate relationship.
Of course you do. Yeah, they're beauties. I heard they're good guys. Beauties, that's another hockey term. So nobody really speaks other languages in my white-ass Vermont town. And my family hosts an exchange student when I was in 8th grade. His name is Alvaro. Or we'll just call him Al. That's kind of how he goes in English. And he was from Barcelona. And he was always like, he stayed with us for a full year. And so he was like, whenever you want, come to Barcelona, like stay as long as you want. His parents were like, I met them. They didn't speak English, but I didn't really meet them then. Yeah. Obviously, it's like hard to like truly know someone if you don't speak their language. But they were like, come whenever you want. And so when I was 18, I graduated high school and I went to Barcelona for the summer. And in summary, we could talk about how and all this stuff, but I learned Spanish in pretty much a month. Like, obviously, I was not like reading college textbooks and was not as comfortable in Spanish as I was in English, but I pretty much got to conversational fluency in 4 weeks. And through that process, I think is when I saw so many of the parallels for how learning works. And I would say that is when I learned truly how to learn. And that was a huge point for me because it was the coolest experience of my life. It was so much fun. It was so rewarding. It's the most rewarding thing ever for me to not be able to speak a language and then little by little be able to speak it and hear yourself saying these words that you like, oh, I wish I could just speak Spanish, and hear yourself like thinking it and dreaming it and all these things. And I think that was when I went from being naturally a good learner and like being a really good student and like enjoying school and enjoying learning new things and being a naturally curious person with having this really influential experience. And that's when I was like, damn, you know what I love? It's not that I love languages, but it's not that I love school. It's that I love like the learning process.
Yeah, the process of it. Yeah. And the skill development.
Yes.
And the confidence that builds. Because you go from starting point, like, I don't know shit about fuck, to, okay, I know some shit about fuck.
Some shit, yeah. But then, and with languages is a great example. The more you learn a language, the more infinite the knowledge you need becomes and how many levels there really are to it and all these things. And again, that's kind of why I love language learning, is because it's, I think, the best metaphor for me, it's been the best metaphor for learning.
Yeah.
Pretty much anytime I'm trying to learn something and I think about how hard it is or like what the steps are, I can always go back to like how I learn languages, and that usually helps me a lot. And that's kind of why I have like a lot of obscure interests. Like, I'm a super mediocre chess player. So for those who play chess, I'm like 1400, 1450 elo on chess.com. You guys can add me if you want. If you want to play, some games.
What's your username?
My username is DW Rosales 3. So you can add me if you want.
Play chess with David.
And chess is so rich with so many metaphors for learning.
So, with language learning, I want to zero in on this first because you actually just spent another summer in Barcelona.
Yes, I did.
And now you know Spanish and a good bit of Catalan.
Yeah, so more historical context. In our U.S. frame, we don't know a lot about Europe and European history, so there are more than 5 Romance languages. There are way more. We are taught that they are Spanish, French, Portuguese, Italian, and Romanian, and that is just not true.
I didn't know Romanian was considered a Romance language.
It is considered a Romance language. Oh. There are tons more living, breathing, dead, alive Romance languages. And one of those is called Catalan, and it's spoken in a region in Spain called Catalonia, obviously. And this region includes Barcelona. There are also other places. So there's a Catalan-speaking part of France, like the city of Perpiñán. They speak some Catalan. There are actually some islands in Italy because in the 1400s, the Kingdom of Catalonia, the Aragon Catalonian Kingdom, went and did some colonizing over there, and that's kind of why Italian pronouns and Catalan pronouns have a lot in common. But I'm kind of digressing. But basically,
you know so many things.
Basically, Barcelona speaks 2 languages. It's a fully bilingual city. And I went the first time, and I was like focusing on Spanish, and but really, literally half the conversations are in Catalan, like about half. Yeah. And it's a fascinating, just like this tango dance between 2 languages and all these people who speak both. And this time I was like, I'm going to learn Catalan.
Did a girl motivate this one?
No, I don't think so. But I do, if there are any Catalan women out there, then that is kind of my long-term plan. Is I would not hate marrying a Catalan woman and having some cute trilingual babies right out of the womb. But no, it was mostly motivated because I love learning, and I didn't get to participate in half of what happens in Barcelona. And I felt like I was, and as we were talking about before, like a lot of people would say like, well, you don't need to learn Catalan because, you know, everyone speaks Spanish. You can just ask them to speak Spanish. And while that's totally true, you definitely like, you see a different side of the culture, a different side of the people, and learning Catalan is just fun. And speaking Catalan is so fun, and it's such a beautiful language.
You want to be in it.
Yeah, I want to be, you don't
like
participate.
In it.
Yeah. There's a really, in The Art of Seduction, Robert Greene has this
fabulous book. One of the first books we connected over.
Yeah.
We connected over punk music and Robert Greene.
Robert Greene books.
What a friendship.
And he has this chapter called Enter the Spirit. And obviously the context is seduction, but he writes about how there is this American actress who moved to Paris and how she only gained the acceptance of the Parisians and the French people by learning their language, dressing like them. And it's kind of the idea of like, I think if you want to learn something deeply, you have to enter the spirit of what that is. Yeah. And that is partly why I wanted to learn Catalan. So
embody radio. You have to embody it.
You have to embody it. Yeah.
Good That's metaphor. Fucking great branding. Thank you, me.
Yeah.
But, okay, so with the process of language learning, you said the first time you went, you learned pretty conversational Spanish in a month.
Yeah.
How'd you do that?
Okay, so a few caveats. First of all, I didn't speak Spanish growing up, but I heard around it, so I think I had a decent ear from it from the beginning. That's number 1. Number 2, I took it in high school, which means I had, even though I think the way we teach high school Spanish is just absurdly dumb and we should blow it up and restart our curriculum, it definitely gave me like at least a base of grammar and vocab and things I could draw on as I was learning. So that helped me accelerate. But there are a few things that drastically helped me. And now I've kind of coined this term that makes sense for me, and it's learning languages, and this is why it's like chess. It's you can't memorize a language. And the problem with how we do in schools is we think like, okay, here are these vocab words, here's what they mean in Spanish, here's what they mean in English, which is often just not true. There's just way more nuance than that. Just memorize these and then just like fill in these verbs and you'll just speak Spanish. And you know what? That's not how languages work. And that's not how languages
conversational
work. That's not how that's not how anything works. And I would even say that's not how learning anything works. There are very few things in life that are learned through memorization. The way we learn things is through pattern recognition. So when you were 1, 2, 3, 4 years old, you knew what chair was because repeatedly people have been like chair. chair. You have come to associate that subconsciously, and now we can see a chair and be like, chair. Or I could say silla, or I could say cadira, which is chair in Catalan. So that's only come not from memorizing, but through pattern recognition. And another way to think about this is, with languages, you have to get used to it. You have to get repetitions. You have to be in it. You have to say things and get corrected and make mistakes and learn and add that to your bank of what you know. And the only way to do that is to actually speak and to actually say things. And this is where a lot of people learning languages is they're like, no, I get like shy and I get scared and I get all these things. And I remember, I'm a big Tim Ferriss fan. I'm sure a lot of people are. And especially when I was 18, I was an even bigger Tim Ferriss fan.
Yeah.
He has this awesome quote in the 4-Hour Workweek, and I think it's, a person's success in life can usually be measured by the number of uncomfortable conversations he or she is willing to have. And I remember having that in my head on the plane going to Barcelona and be like, I knew all these concepts. So I was like, I just need to freaking do it. And there are some other tools. So that's one, is just do it, which is much easier said than done. I think it might be more useful to say, and your people are science nerds. So remember in chemical reactions, we have this concept called activation energy. And activation energy is when you need a certain amount of energy to make a chemical reaction happen. And I call this language learning activation energy, language activation energy, which means you need to have these kind of like base materials and get to the point where you can then have the conversations, which is where you're going to go from like starting to 100x as fast as possible. Like that's how you learn, is you have to get to the point where the reaction starts and then it just goes off on its own.
So what is that point?
So there are a few tactical things that you can do. I think, for example, with most Romance languages, there are basically 10 to 15 verbs that are used for pretty much everything.
Yeah.
Learn, and again, you have to do a little bit of memorization. Learn what these like 10 to 15 key verbs are. Learn how to say them in the present tense. That's how you get grammar. So now you have basically the tools, to be, to say, to have, to go, all these core verbs, which, for Spanish, there's even more than English, I think, fewer of these smaller amount of verbs you need to learn. So that's grammar. And then vocab, you use something called cognates, which is, funnily enough, a cognate. So I remember explaining this in Spanish. I was telling Alvaro, and I was saying, es un cognado, like it's a cognate, which means that the word, they kind of have similar roots. So in English, it's cognate, in Spanish, it's cognado, and in Catalan, it's cognat. And I'm sure in French, it's something similar. Another example would be like information in English, información in Spanish, información in Catalan.
Información.
And in French, what is it?
I think it's just información.
So it's basically what it is in Catalan. And there are so many of these patterns in our languages, which means if you're learning a language that's obviously, I'm in the kiddie pool of Romance languages. So if you're out there like learning Chinese or Japanese, I'm sorry, I have nothing for you in this respect. But just by knowing these patterns, I realized I already had a ton of vocab. So, okay, I have all the verbs I need, and I have all the vocab I need. And just by doing that, I can like say basic sentences, and that's what you need. Now I'm day 2. Like I'm in Barcelona. I have learned my 10 key Catalan verbs. I've figured out what most of the cognates are, and I'm gonna figure out more as I go, and as I go and have more pattern recognition do its thing. But just that is enough to start speaking, and then you just gotta speak, and then you just gotta be like, you gotta get over the thing of like people are gonna laugh at you. So here's something someone asked me the other day. You want me to pause or can I tell the story?
Tell the story.
Somebody asked me the other day, what do you think you're really good at? Like what makes you good at learning? And it's because I get a huge like dopamine hit out of being wrong and being corrected. And I think this happened the first time I was in Barcelona, because when I was learning Spanish at such like a fast pace, like pure immersion, I would get corrected like 20 times a day. And every time I got corrected, I was like, oh yeah, wait, I know this now. And I have some like vivid memories of saying like some really stupid things. So like I'm like, wow, you idiot. But I never forgot that, never made that mistake. And so I kind of trained my brain to love being wrong, which made me learn super fast. Because then I sought out being wrong. I sought out opportunities to speak. I sought out opportunities to know this cognate rule, and I'm gonna try to use it here, not knowing the word, but because I know the cognate rule. And then like, oh, you're close, but it's not that, it's this. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's a very transferable skill. The willingness to be wrong.
100%.
And like the excitement around being wrong.
And this is why I love language learning, is because it's not just about language learning. Right. Pretty much everything I've said this applies to everything. Like even this activation energy concept, I think it applies to learning pretty much anything. Like even fitness, like
Well,
what
yeah.
are people scared of? They're scared of going to the gym the first time.
Everybody's scared of looking stupid. Everybody's scared of looking stupid. Everybody's scared of not knowing what they're doing. Everybody's scared of people making fun of them. All that shit. So actually, this is a nice segue into where I wanted to go. I wanted to go specifically with like traveling to a foreign country, but like I guess this could apply to anything, but we'll start with foreign country. Because you literally went at 18.
Yeah.
You didn't really speak much of the language, and you went by yourself, right?
Yeah, I went by myself, but in fairness, I was staying with a host family.
Right, but like largely solo venture. And I think a lot of people want to do that, but they're too scared. What would be like your top 3 pieces of advice for those people?
For being scared of traveling solo?
Yeah, but they really want to do it. Like, what should they do to help get over that fear?
Okay, so a few simple things. Again, let's think about activation energy. So what are things that could like get you closer to doing that? I am a huge fan of solo travel subreddit because there are people all the time sharing about all these places they go to solo. So I've actually been solo traveling for the last 5 months.
Yeah, David is really
I've been to like 15 to 20 cities in the last 5 months. So I would say do your research on places, have a plan, and stay in places where you're just going to be like easy opportunity for safe social interaction. So even obviously as a white male who is dressed well, traveling solo for me, I'll walk down any street at any hour in most cities and like feel fine. Like now, obviously that's dumb, but for the most part, I'm going to be a lot safer than a lot of other people. Yeah. And I have that privilege that some other people might not. But for example, social hostels in Europe, youth hostels in Europe, there are going to be women there. You're gonna be able to have a group. So that's another thing you could have where it's gonna make it safer and lower that activation energy to just go do the thing. Yeah.
Love that.
Number 2, get rid of your lease because then you don't have to worry about money. Because
that'd be fucking
you
dumb.
can just roll over your rent into doing fun things abroad.
Can you imagine paying New York rent and traveling?
No, that's why I'm not currently paying New York rent and traveling instead. Because doing 2 at the same time sounds ridiculous.
Can we just put a bookmark in, like a brief side quest? Your studio apartment in New York City cost how much?
It was $1,775 per month, but I loved that thing.
This was David's crown jewel.
I loved that thing. Had all my books.
Oh.
I was never more than one lateral lunge away from any thought I've ever had because all my journals were there and all my books were there. So it was like I had my regular brain and then I just had like my whole external
your compiled brain
just like surrounded around me.
Your collected works.
Yeah, exactly. Not even my collected works, my collected thoughts.
Yeah. Which
made it really good for just like learning stuff fast. Making connections. Making connections between things and yeah. So I was sad to leave it, but
yeah, it was an iconic.
It was
place.
iconic. Lower East Side, Attorney Street. Yeah, so New York City people.
Really high quality.
It was in really crappy 5th floor walk up on the Lower East Side.
A side quest on the side quest. When I went and visited David in New York, I had a lot of stuff with me, as one does when they are me and they travel places. We lugged a full-size suitcase, a carry-on suitcase, a carry-on bag, and I'm pretty sure a backpack up the 5th floor walk up.
Yeah.
There was no elevator.
There's no elevator.
I was sweating profusely. It was like 11 p.m. It was not the best thing I've ever done, but it was worth it. I really felt like
that was
in that
life.
moment.
That was just my life.
Oh my God. Okay, side quest over. So now taking this from language learning into learning anything or like starting anything new, because you are somebody that you're just very like you give no fucks. Like you're like, yeah, I'll start something new. Yeah, I'll talk to the girl. I'll do the thing. Like what advice do you have for people that are just fucking paralyzed by fear of starting new things? Like if you could give them a little David potion to sip and just go do shit, what would be in it?
No tengas vergüenza, which means in Spanish like don't have shame, but for some reason it translates much. It just works better. It's just a better.
It sounds a lot better.
Like don't be. I don't know. Some days you just have to do it. At some point, like you could do all the fear setting and read all the stoicism books you want, but at the end of the day, like you kind of just got to like do the thing. But so one is finding strategies to lower the activation energy, which I've outlined in the concept of language learning. Whatever your discipline is. One, I would brainstorm on what those things are that would make that easier.
Let's put it in a fitness context, since people are here a lot for fitness.
And I was in a long time ago now. It seems like was a personal trainer for 2 years, so I do supposedly know fitness.
I've owned a fitness business for 7 years, so we're in a good place. So fitness, people want to say this will probably be coming out like close to New Year's, like around the time when fucking tons of people are starting a fitness journey. especially people like doing it for the first time, or the people that like stop doing it for a while and they're having a really hard time getting back into it, what would be like the activation energy for that? I really love that term.
Yeah.
That's a really great term.
It's great.
Thanks. I like it a lot.
I made it up. Well, I didn't make it up, but I applied it to this, so it's an original.
I love it.
It's an original idea.
I love it.
I think it's an original idea. Yeah, I mean, nothing you haven't heard. Accountability. Like, obviously. Same thing with language learning. If I was talking smack, I was like, I'm going to learn Spanish so fast. And you know what I mean? If I didn't do that, I would have been, like, mad embarrassed. So I kind of had that, like, I have to do it. So I think there are a lot of great, like, accountability things. I think even, like, simple loss aversion stuff, like giving your best friend $400 and be like, don't give this back to me unless I go to all my workouts this week.
I love that.
Yeah, and again,
get some skin in the game.
Skin in the Game, which is a great book by Nicholas Nassim Taleb.
Oh, I haven't read that.
Unrelated, totally fine. We don't
love
need to
that. He's a great author, though.
He's fantastic. Having accountability, skin in the game, lowering the stakes so that way you don't beat yourself up for failure. So kind of like language learning is you're gonna mess up and it's gonna be hard. So instead of having this like super in-depth program that's going to be 4 days a week and an hour and a half and you're going to have to like uproot your life, that's a terrible idea. You should just work out twice a week for like 30 minutes and like go and feel good about yourself.
Yeah.
Like,
and be like, I did that.
Yeah.
I did that thing. I checked the box off. Like,
yeah.
And I felt better afterwards. Like,
Exactly.
I am now excited to do it again.
100%. Yeah. I mean, so my fitness circles, I'm in like kind of the strength conditioning worlds. I work a lot with like specifically hockey players. And one of our kind of people in our field, as some of you I'm sure know, is Mike Boyle. And he always talks about how he'd rather have kids in his facilities twice a week, 50 weeks a year, than 4 days a week for the summer. Because consistency is what's going to matter. And it's the same with learning anything, right? These metaphors. And the fitness industry is really rich with learning metaphors as well.
Oh, yeah. And it's great for metaphors because it's physically tangible. Like, you can see, it's very obvious when it starts happening, like, versus a less tangible concept. And people generally like the effect they get from it. So it's a very easy teaching tool.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you would say for, like, what would be, like, a lowering the stakes example besides, like, 2 days a week versus 5?
I think it should be shorter. I think your workout should be shorter.
Yeah.
You should not be. I think if you're sore, okay, I've worked with a lot of middle schoolers in general, like high schoolers, and like they kind of like always want to do too much. They always want to do too much. And I always say to them, hey,
that's the same thing with like 20, 30, 40-year-old women.
Okay, good to know. If you're sore, if you're just starting out and you're sore the next day, and now you feel less likely to go because you're too sore, that means you did too much. Like, what's the saying? Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Like, usually insert cliche about how less is more and all these things. Like, less really is more. And
you can't do more until you've done less really, really well.
Yeah. Yeah, and just like push, pull, hip hinge, core, smell ya. That's it. That's all you need to do, I think.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, and
squat,
like,
hinge, push, pull, carry. Like,
yeah, and that's what, a lot of elite athletes do as well.
Yeah. People try and reinvent the wheel.
100%.
And like, especially in the bodybuilding community, we have a lot of niche knowledge about like, oh, this is best for the lengthened position glute. Like, this is best for mid-range. This is best for this. Like, most people, you don't need to worry about that. Like, you don't need to worry about that, at least not starting out. And like,
I would even say, so
like,
I'm actually,
most of the time.
I have a side project where I work with the NHL strength coaches. So I talk with a lot of NHL strength coaches and I've like seen their programs. The things that NHL players do is remarkably similar to what you should be doing. Obviously, they're doing more weight and stuff because they're NHL athletes. Yeah. But a lot of times, especially in season, they're training twice a week and they get in there and they do a push, pull, a hip, a hinge, and a core, and they get out of there.
It's almost like it works.
Yeah, it's crazy. And isn't it weird how basics work? Yeah.
I've been saying that for over 7 years.
Yeah.
And we're still here.
Yep, we're going to have to say it until the end of eternity.
Embracing the basics, though. Like, the basics of anything. The basics of learning a language, the basics of fitness, the basics of personal development, the basics of wellness, the basics of whatever the fuck the thing is.
Yeah.
Like, if you try and jump to the advanced level, if you try and jump to the 400 level class before you've taken the 100, like, it's all lost on you because now all you have is information with no foundation beneath it.
Yes, what Emily said.
I know a few things sometimes. Not a ton, but a few. But yeah, like, and I think when it comes to the topic of really anything, but like especially this show is all about teaching people like how to embody what they want to become. Like, literally think about the very fucking base level. Like, you went to Spain, you're like, what was your like driving desire to go to Spain?
I just really want to learn Spanish.
I want to learn Spanish. Like, that's bottom of the barrel. Like, that's literally the base level. You're like, I'm going to start
I just
at
want to
square
like
one.
talk to my grandparents, like.
Literally just wanted to be able to have a conversation.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't, I want to be able to write a book in Spanish.
No. Absolutely not. Absolutely
Yeah.
not. And here's another like weird thing about language. I think it's a good metaphor for fitness as well. Is people are like, oh, are you fluent? And like anyone who's ever learned a language as an adult can verify that is an absolutely nonsensical thing, because it'd be like you go to so you're a person who goes to the gym. Are you fluent in going to the gym? And you'd be like, I don't know, dude. Like
You're like, who is?
Are you fluent in powerlifting? It's a scale.
Right.
It's a gradient. And
right.
obviously my Spanish now is like 50 times better than my Catalan. I just started learning it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and even like too within different seasons of your life, like with the language example, if you stop speaking it for
and this is why it's
2
also
years,
such a good metaphor,
right? If you stop speaking it for 2 years, it's not going to be as good as it was when you're speaking it every day, but you still know it.
Yeah.
But you're not as fluent with fitness. Like you might have been really fucking good at fitness in one season of life, and then like you got injured or something, and you're weaker, you're not as proficient in movement because you haven't been doing them as often, like whatever. Like, so that's where it's like, that's a terrible question.
Yes.
It's like, why are we even asking?
It's binary.
Yeah.
Usually things that don't allow for nuance
Awful.
are bad. Yeah.
Which is
ironically binary. But anyway.
Fuck. I hate that.
I hope people followed that logic.
I followed it, and I'm
Okay.
angry. I'm very angry now. Ah!
With exceptions, almost always.
That just bothered me a
allow
lot.
for nuance.
That just really bothered me a lot.
Yeah.
Oh, I feel uncomfortable. Okay. So, language. Language is very important to you. Language is very important to you. It's very important to my sister also, like, and the preservation of it. So, why is language important to you? And why should it be important to us?
Yeah, so there's why I like learning languages and why it's fun and metaphors for learning, but also just why it's important. And there's kind of language as we use it in the English language, and kind of we get into how that applies to writing, but I think more concretely, like why learn Catalan if, you know, almost everyone speaks Catalan in Catalonia, speaks Spanish. Mm-hmm. And that's because there are things in languages that you can't translate and can't be communicated. And so by definition, when you have new language tools, you have new thinking tools, which means you can think differently. And that means, to me, celebrating and learning different languages means celebrating our diversity for thinking. And this gets political pretty quickly. We're like, philosophically, I believe that diversity and accepting people different from you is a good thing. And I think fascists would disagree with me and say that, no, we kind of need a mono XYZ. And I think, like, obviously you say, like, yeah, those are ridiculous ideas. But I think a lot of us in some respects, like, hold ideas similar to that. And language learning and learning how different people think can kind of illuminate us to how people are different and how that's also beautiful. It also has a lot of concrete applications. So, for example, there's a phenomenal New Yorker piece from like 2015, and it's called, I think, Can Dying Languages Be Saved? And in this piece, the author, whose name I don't know right now, we can add it to the show notes.
I would love that.
It's a fantastic piece. Interviews people who are speakers of dying, near dead, or indigenous languages. So one example is a language called Selknam in South America, where this person that she interviewed is the only living speaker, who he actually revived the language. She talks about an example of a language, I think in Papua New Guinea, but we're going to have to fact check, that has 40 different words for soil.
Wow.
And here's why this is important. We were talking about how hockey has wheel as like, you would translate it to English as to skate fast, but that actually doesn't account for the nuance. And English, because, you know, we don't interact with soil in a certain way because of the way English evolved with its culture and its ecology and all these things, we only have one word. We just say soil. Whereas this indigenous language has 40 different words for it. What does that mean? That means baked into their language and the way they think is knowledge about soil and how this stuff works that we literally don't have access to because our language simply doesn't have it.
And if there's 40 different words for it, there's a reason for that.
Exactly, because it evolved out of its culture and ecology, right?
And like, I don't know if you posted or if I just happened to like serendipitously see it somewhere, but like there have been even native cultures that had like 40 different words for tree. And that was how medicine was discovered, is because all of these different trees had these different medicinal properties.
And that is a thing I'm sure you've probably talked about psychedelics a bit on your podcast. Like, if you're interested in any of that stuff regarding ecology, you 1000% have to thank the indigenous languages
100%.
that Western people have basically use these indigenous people to help them learn about these plants, and then patent and then made billions of dollars. Meanwhile, of course, these indigenous people are not getting what they deserve in payment for these things. But that is a digression nonetheless. Like,
that is a conversation I would love to have on this show one day.
When we talk about like, oh, you know, these indigenous languages, like, oh, it's like when you go somewhere, it's like, oh, so they're speaking Spanish, like, this is so annoying, why don't they just speak English? It's like,
why do we expect everyone to speak English?
And that's another thing,
like,
which is, I think,
it's very entitled.
Yep, there's a lot of problems with that, and that's why I think it's really important to preserve and celebrate languages, which means celebrating diversity of thinking, which is also why I love it. And I just think, like, you can't go through the process of learning another language and like learning how other people think on this, like, such an intimate level, in learning how their language fits into their culture in these ways, and how they have these phrases and words that just don't translate, and be like, wow, the diversity of humanity is beautiful, and we need to protect it.
I absolutely agree. And even just like, whether it's words or the way things are phrased. I remember one of the first things that really like struck me about the French language is when you say I miss you to someone, you say tu me manques, which means you are missing from me. Which, like, how fucking beautiful is that? Like, that's way more poetic than, but like, it also shows the meaning. Like,
it also doesn't mean I miss you.
Right.
It has the construction of the verb is totally different.
Right.
Which means people are going to think about that in a different way.
Right. Like, that means something different. Like, you are missing from me. That means you are part of me, and that part is not there. Not I miss you. Like, separate. It's more so it's just like, and there's billions, infinite examples of that.
Yeah. Literally. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can even go within your language, like the hockey example of like even celebrating dialects and celebrating different accents. Like, people are like, I don't like that accent. It's like, I think every accent is amazing, because every accent has so many cool words and different ways to think about it. And it obviously, you know, is because of their culture. So, for example, in the 1920s, there was this really cool book written, and I don't remember the author, but the premise was kind of British purists saying, like, oh, the American English is not pure English. And this author rebutted, which is now like a pretty well-known piece, about how American English is beautiful for a lot of reasons. One example, think about how many metaphors we have from baseball, for example. Oh, you struck out. Oh, you fouled out. Like, all these kind of things. Oh, you're up to bat. Think about how we use these metaphorically, and how those only exist in our language because of baseball, and how this sport, which is an American sport, does not exist in the UK. You know, UK English speakers don't have access to these, like, metaphors and using these things. And that's a cool example of how even within the same language, these two, you know, these same language, but we have different language tools. And it's because our languages evolve from our culture. Yeah. And there are also, like, obviously some downsides to this too. Like, if you look about the impact of the patriarchal Catholic Church and that whole system, like, you know, it's hard to speak Spanish and ignore, when you default to saying, if it's, you know, if there's a boy and a girl, you say chicos, and all these things that default are patriarchal. And obviously English has its problems too, and we're kind of seeing this with a lot of, obviously, political movements right now. But, you know, our language and our culture, you can't separate them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's, I really, like, I just want to reiterate the point that you said. It's so beautiful, like, celebration of language is celebration of our diversity. And we don't get that enough.
No, and it means, like, it sounds great, but it literally means more knowledge. So if you love learning, and if you're excited about innovation and these things, like, you can't do that without different ways of thinking. Yeah,
and exactly, the different ways of thinking part, because it does train your brain to quite literally just expand how it processes things.
Yeah, literally learning. This is why I love languages, because you're speaking a different language. You are literally speaking an entirely different way from how you grew up speaking, and that's cool.
And then even just, like, culturally aside, that's also just really good for your brain. Like, learning new skills, adopting new things, like, training your brain to go down different neural pathways and form new neural pathways. It's really good for your brain. So it's like nobody loses. We preserve culture, and our brains are healthier.
There's no downside to learning more languages. And again, in Barcelona, one of my favorite things about being in Spain is because they're not my politics, so I don't, is asking people political questions and watching friends get mad at each other. And then I really, if you want to get someone from Catalonia, like, if you want to, like, get into the weeds politically, just ask them what language they spoke at home, and that'll usually tell you a lot.
Really? I mean, like Spanish versus Catalan?
Or like with both, and it just tells you a lot about how, like, it'll give you a good sense usually. Yeah. And it's really, you're only 1 or 2 questions away from getting into, like, a big fight about Spanish history. But anyway, I remember my friend, one of my best friends in the world, his name's Marcel. He is super Catalan guy. Super Catalan, probably the biggest FC Barcelona fan in the world. He has season tickets. One of my best friends ever. He reads and writes in Spanish as well. He does Catalan. He's a scholar. He's one of the smartest people I know. And I remember asking him, like, oh yeah, like, what do you think about, like, when Catalan people, like, kind of refuse to learn Spanish because of their, you know, they're saying in the name of trying to, like, preserve the Catalan tongue and all these things. So he goes, obviously he's all for preserving the Catalan tongue. There's like stickers on people's laptops, which is mantén català, which is like maintain Catalan. I maintain Catalan.
Yeah.
Like, I preserve it.
Yeah.
And he says, I think it's absurd. And then he says, there's a phrase I love. And he said, we were talking in Spanish, he says, el saber no ocupa espacio, which my translation of that is, knowledge doesn't take up space.
Ooh.
And I think that's another beautiful thing about language learning and learning in general, and how this kind of applies to learning anything.
Yeah.
Is when you can grow up speaking Catalan and speak Catalan perfectly, and people will think like, oh, if I learn Spanish, it'll like detract from my Catalan, or vice versa. A lot of Spaniards say that too about learning Catalan and all these things. And I think in English, like, we think too, like, oh, it's kind of a distraction to learn other things, but that's just not how knowledge works. Like, knowledge doesn't actually take up space.
Yeah, knowledge informs knowledge informs knowledge informs knowledge.
In fact, the opposite is true.
Really?
I would say, I think, well, not only does knowledge not take up space, but I think learning one thing gives you tools to draw and to learn the next thing.
Yeah.
So,
That's what I mean. Like, knowledge informs knowledge.
Yes.
Like, you're like...
Yes, that I agree with. I was adding on to
Yeah.
But with Romance languages, for example, because I already spoke Spanish, learning Catalan was way easier.
Right.
Because there's so much, they have a lot in common. So I had
Right.
unique tools to draw on that I could, there's a lot of cognates, there's a lot of similar grammar structures. The pronunciation is very different, but at least I could like roll the R, which is basically the same rolled R in Catalan and all these things. So I had those tools, but then I also I've also gone through the process, so I'd also kind of known how to learn language, and that made it, with like 1/10 the effort, I got my Catalan to like a pretty good level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that applies to so many things too. Like, even thinking about it in a
Everything.
fitness context, you learn how to powerlift, you can probably learn how to Olympic weightlift. You learn how to Olympic weightlift, you probably can learn how to do calisthenics. You learn how to do whatever the fuck. Like, you can learn how to do whatever the fuck because you have a base set of skills. Like, with fitness, it would be movement patterns. With language, it would be like base structure, especially languages that are similar, like Romance languages.
Yeah.
What did you call it? The activation energy? Like,
Language activation energy.
Yeah,
Lowers the activation energy.
By learning one thing, you've lowered the activation energy for learning anything else. So why the fuck not learn something else?
Yeah, because knowledge doesn't take up space.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I love that.
100%.
Okay, so to keep it political, because we love that, you're really passionate about climate change. And
Yes.
I love that about you. And you've taught me so much. So first of all, where did that passion come from?
I mean, I think it's the pressing issue of my generation.
Yeah.
You know? I think an interest in a lot of, again, I'm interested in a lot of things, but it was just that area where, like, damn, this is kind of on my generation, and I think there's so many exciting options and ways to think about it and go about it, and so many just amazingly intelligent people in almost every industry you can possibly think of with amazing ideas to make a cleaner, healthier planet that ultimately means a cleaner, healthier planet for us and also a more equal planet as well.
Talk about
Yeah, so
zoom in on that one.
my interest, okay, for context, I went to NYU, New York University, so I was living in New York City. I took an awesome class with Professor Karen Holmberg, who I adore. She's amazing. She's a volcanologist. That means she studies volcanoes, but also an archaeologist. And also, she's also just like good at, knows a lot of science.
Lots of
Lots of science. And I took a class with her. I took 2 classes with her, but this class was called NYC Coastlines. And we just studied the waterways around New York City. And we realized, we went to Governor's Island, which I shouldn't share because it's kind of like a hidden gem. But anyway, it's this great place where you're like, wow, New York has the most amazing nature possible.
Yeah.
And this is why it's one of the world's great cities, probably.
Yeah.
Because it's located in this like perfect harbor
Yeah.
with these amazing islands and all these things. And I was reading about how, you know, New York City used to be the oyster capital of the world, and we had all these amazing oysters.
This. I got a lot of oyster content
Great
last
book,
year.
The Big Oyster by Mark Kurlansky is just, if you're interested in New York City history, it is one of my favorite books about New York. And then I was reading about how oysters clean water and all these things, and we were working in our class with a group called the Billion Oyster Project, who's working to put oysters back into the Hudson River. And I was like, damn, there are so many freaking oysters. You know, like
it's these little
oysters.
fuckers. Like,
and obviously, oysters alone aren't gonna save the planet,
right? But like
obviously,
synergistically with
a ton of other things. And also, I think a lot of climate things can happen on a local level, and I think that's what's really exciting is by having oysters in New York City is going to have cleaner water. New York City. There's also a great New Yorker piece on this about how oysters kind of act as as natural seawalls. So when when the next big flood comes to the New York City harbor, if we have a lot of oysters in the right areas, and this is like all like cool engineering stuff goes on, then it can actually like help protect communities. Yeah.
That's really dope.
Super cool. But I think with climate change in general, people are like, oh, what can I do? And it's like,
that's what I wanted to ask. Like, what's something practical that like people can do?
Yeah, so I think of it as there's a Venn diagram. There's 3 things. What are you interested in? So no one thing's going to solve climate change. And again, don't get into false dilemmas. You're like, ooh, electric cars aren't going to save the planet. It's like, yeah, no shit, electric cars aren't going to save the planet. But that and this and this and this and this and 20 other things, and we're going to have a much better planet. Yeah. So anyway, what you're interested in, what you're uniquely good at, and what needs, like, where's there a need. So let's say
that one more time.
What you're interested in. What do you like? Damn, that's cool. So for me, even though I have no like formal science, I actually do have a bit of science training, but I'm definitely no volcanologist out here. Though I did take one volcanology class, so I do know a bit about volcanoes. But anyway, so oysters was really cool. There's a need for them. And do you have a special expertise in it? Now, my special expertise was definitely not in like knowing how oysters work, but it is in communicating and sharing and writing. Yeah. And so that was, for this example, kind of a good Venn diagram. Another example could be, let's say you're a fitness coach and you work with people.
We're going to make it about kelp?
We could make it about kelp.
I thought that's where you were going to take it.
No, I wasn't going to take it kelp.
Okay, take it where you were going to take it.
Getting people to drive less and bike more and walk more is one of the best ways to help have cleaner air and a cleaner atmosphere and better living conditions for humans and every living thing in this planet. Yeah. And as a trainer, you're kind of in a unique position to help people logistically be able to do that. So I, living in New York City, there are times where a lot of people would have just called a car, and I would always grab a city bike. Yeah. Because I'm physically capable of doing that.
Yeah. So it's like, why not? Like, why not do what I can? It's also probably somewhat enjoyable for you because you like exploring, like, yes, and you love the environment. So you're like, it's just like, it's a no-brainer for you. Yeah.
Yeah. And as a fitness coach, because you're working with so many people directly, that's where it's like, oh, well, if we all recycle, it's not going to save the planet. And like, I'm just one person. What can me recycling do? It's like, yeah, you're right. Just you recycling, not a lot, obviously. But you having expertise in the fitness industry and being able to influence a lot of people.
Like the web. It just...
Yep. And where you have expertise, obviously you're going to be able to have more impact. Yeah. So I'm not suggesting you quit. I have not done this. I have not quit my career and worked for climate nonprofits. I am trying to use my skills that I have within my career because ultimately I think that's going to be able to help more. So me, because I think I'm a decent writer and
you're a fabulous writer, communicator. David. Fuck off. Like
my real talent.
Can we link some of your writing in the?
Of course,
love that.
I have a piece called "Learning an Endangered Language," which will go into more in depth about some of the stuff we've done before. So love that. Definitely link that piece. Love it's very long.
We can link it.
But
staying in your lane of expertise. Sorry.
Yes.
But yeah, like, and not completely throwing the baby out with the bathwater and being like, I'm gonna jump over here. I feel like that's almost counter.
Yeah,
like
exactly. Like if you're a really smart engineer. Don't go clean up trash. I mean, obviously, please go clean up trash in your local neighborhood. Right, but don't be like, this is what I'm... It's like, dude, you should be leveraging how good you are at math and engineering and coming up with amazing things. And so think about what you're good at, what you're passionate about, and what needs help. And if you think about that Venn diagram, that's where we all can have our collective impact and much more impact.
I think that's really beautiful because too, like a lot of us, we get into that very like existential dread place of like, I can't do anything to help this. And of course, a lot of it does rest on the hands of large corporations, but most of us aren't running large corporations. So it's like, okay, what can I do to empower myself and feel like I'm making a difference and like actually
and what are you gonna like make one? What are you gonna have fun with?
Yeah, you know? Because that's something you're gonna be more likely to keep doing. It's literally just like with anything else. Like if you want to make language learning more fun, like how can you like learning? You'll be able to learn a language better if it's fun. You'll be doing your fitness
to learn it.
Yeah. If you like make fitness fun, you'll be more motivated to do it. If you make helping the planet fun, and also too like if you want to reach a fitness goal and you just fucking walk more. Better for the planet and better for your fitness. Like
and like don't live in a suburban sprawl. I don't know if any of you live in Southern California, which is just a nightmare of traffic and all these things. And what horrible city planning that was. But also yeah, we don't have to get into transit and other, but obviously there are a lot of things that go into like whether you can walk to work and all these things. But anyway,
yeah. But also too, we think about it like, you know, I really love blue zones. So like one of the characteristic features of most blue zone cities is people walk a lot. So like when they've tried to go in and essentially blue zone an area, they make it more walkable. They add walking paths, they add bike paths, all those things, and it's like, yeah, it's almost like things that are generally good for us are also good for the planet, and there's this synergistic energy.
Sitting in a car is not good for you.
No.
Filling up the gas pump and having fumes go in your face is not good for you.
Right.
There's literally no downside to like trying to make the earth cleaner.
Right. And, yeah. And so then it's like, well, how did we get here? But that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, I could definitely talk about that, but I don't think we should.
I don't know if we have time for
I don't know
that.
if we have time for that.
But okay, I love that. I think, and I want to make a graphic of that Venn diagram.
I have a graphic.
Really
I've actually,
I love that.
yes, I have.
You should post it, and I'll link it in the show notes.
Send it. I made it on Canva, so you should probably remake it.
I'll do.
Emily actually makes.
I'm David's content team.
Emily makes.
I was so proud that the one abortion piece did so well. I was like, I felt so good about that. I was like, this is one of David's top.
Do you want to transition to like propaganda and content, and maybe we can move that in?
Let's do it.
I studied persuasion in college. Obviously, I studied writing.
I didn't know you studied persuasion.
Okay, also, I was in a really cool program. It's called the Gallatin School of Individualized Study at NYU, and every student makes their own major.
I remember you telling me that.
I have a lot to say about higher education and stuff, but I guess we'll...
You have a lot to say about a lot of things.
Yep.
Thank God you like writing.
This is why it's hard for me to go on podcasts. Because
you're like, I could talk about 12,000 things.
Yes. So anyway, I was in Gallatin, and so I made my own major, which I think is kind of the future of higher education in a lot of ways, but gonna hold in that digression. And part of what I did, so I did some creative writing, some scientific writing. I also did a lot of persuasion. And when you study persuasion, you think a ton about word choice and how words matter. And to connect this back to climate change, I can give an example. In a cool, if you're in a copywriting, if you're a language nerd, it's not the most riveting book, but it does have some valuable concepts and content. And it's called Words That Work by Frank Luntz. And he was a Republican public relations strategist for the Bush era. So he helped Bush and Newt Gingrich and a bunch of these top Republicans come up with good slogans, come up with good sayings, telling them which sayings to avoid and why they worked. And one example is just after Republicans decided they were going to hate the planet, because before it was totally bipartisan. Richard Nixon started the EPA. Again, I can talk about this all day. But anyway, they were like, damn, how can we make drilling for oil and polluting all these areas sound less bad? How can we make it sound less shitty?
Oh.
And Frank Luntz helped them come up with this saying of, instead of saying drilling for oil, they started to say exploring for energy. So I want you to forget about everything you know about any of these topics, and you hear the phrase drilling for oil, and you hear the phrase exploring for energy. Which one would you be more likely to vote for?
Right.
Obviously exploring for energy.
It sounds so expansive. It sounds so fun. It sounds so like, oh my God, we're innovating. We're doing this.
And the specific technique at play here is something called the ladder of abstraction, which is a persuasive, a word choice persuasive tool where you take something concrete, and if you want to make it sound not as bad, you make it more abstract. So exploring is kind of a synonym for drilling, but obviously more vague. And energy is kind of a synonym for oil if you really stretch it, but obviously more vague and abstract. And you see this all the time. You see this when Vladimir Putin calls murdering children in Ukraine and a totally unjustified invasion. You hear it when he calls it a special military operation. So he chooses 3 very intentionally vague words to make his atrocities persuasively sound less bad. And that was just for example off the top of my head. This happens all the time in politics. And it's hard. I don't watch debates. I don't read tweets. I don't read them the same, I think, as most people, because I kind of see what they're trying to do persuasively.
It's like Oz. Like the curtain gets pulled back. You're like,
Yes.
I know what's happening here. Yeah. Like,
and I call this is a term I believe I made up. I call this defensive propaganda, when you take the time to observe what a phrase means. Could be so politics is a good example. You take a look at what a phrase really means. You look inside of it, you look on top of it, you look behind it, you look at the history of the word. And through that, a lot of the times, you can see through a lot of political jargon, you can see through a lot of catchphrases, and you can have a more informed, you'll see past the persuasion, and you'll see past the rhetoric a lot of the time. And I think this is why I love George Orwell. I think he was a master at defensive propaganda. He was so good at seeing these words and being like, here's ABC, let's break this apart, why this is bullshit. In his book, Homage to Catalonia, which is one of his nonfiction books, totally digression.
I didn't know he wrote one about Catalonia.
And actually, Orwell digression. I love George Orwell. Then we'll come back to word choice, and we'll come back to the abortion thing. George Orwell, really a lot of his ideas for 1984 and Animal Farm stemmed out of the fact that he volunteered in the Spanish Civil War, which was fought between 1936 and 1939, and is absolutely essential if you want to understand history, because you had a German and Italian fascist-backed uprising, the nationalists, against a Soviet-backed U.S., France, U.K. decided not to help, which is a whole other political discussion, fighting each other. So you had kind of World War II and the Cold War all in one 4-year conflict in one country. Anyway, Orwell, on the left, meaning not the fascist side, saw the problems with the Soviet propaganda and how really there was kind of a civil war within the civil war, and how Soviet leaders would basically throw in jail other left, like on the same side, other leaders into jail under claims calling they're Trotskyists. And Orwell spends a few pages in this book outlining where this term Trotskyist comes from and kind of why they name call it and why it's a totally useless, vague term. So we see Orwell calling out a ladder of abstraction technique, which we still see today, and we saw with the Exploring for Energy, and we see with special military operation. So I think that's one of the reasons I love reading Orwell, is because he's such a master at this. And I think if we all cultivated kind of that skill and like, okay, what does this word mean? Where does it come from? And
right, it's a branch of discernment.
Great. Yeah, it helps you discern. Yeah, and so that's one of the reasons I love Orwell. And I think you can really understand his key ideas in 1984 in Animal Farm through his nonfiction, through his actual firsthand accounts of experiences in the Spanish Civil War and elsewhere. Yeah. So do you want to bring that back to
circling
abortion?
it back? Yep, that's exactly where I was about to go.
Okay. This comes up in abortion, and I'm actually really happy I saw this finally. This is finally changing. Is for decades now, the abortion debate has been pro-life versus pro-choice. Okay. Let's put our George Orwell defensive propaganda hats on. And I want you to forget about what you know about abortion. And you just hear the terms pro-choice and pro-life. Which side do you think you're going to be on?
Life, because I don't want to be considered a murderer.
You don't want to be considered... Okay, so if you're not pro-life, that means you're what? Against
Pro-death.
life? Pro-death?
Yeah.
It means you're either pro-death or against life. Two things, typically, without any other context, you'd be like...
Would be bad.
Would be bad. And that means,
also, just for context, that is not me saying that I'm pro...
No.
Yeah, this was an example. Before anybody spins that, it's like, oh my God, she's against abortion. I'm very for abortion.
Obviously, we're both very pro-choice. And pro people making informed decisions with their doctors without
for their bodies and
their
lives.
bodies, without governors like Greg Abbott and other Republican leaders thinking that they're you guys all know the spiel. You get
we
the
only
deal.
we can only hope. We can only hope.
But what you see here, just from a persuasive rhetorical level, is that the pro-life group had a huge head start because their word choice was better. Pro-choice was terrible.
Yeah,
pro-choice was terrible. Just bad. Just
like
Democrats
I could see where it would sound good. It's like, oh, we want you to have choice. Like that.
Choice is not as exciting as life.
It's like
there's really no excuse for being that bad at marketing on a national level like that. And that's how we can help to kind of break down. Now it's like, okay, like so is it possible that you're pro-life because the way you talk to yourself, the words you use have these certain connotations. Obviously, that's going to influence how we think about it. And so it's not only breaking down to see through the rhetoric, but it's also to see through our own thinking, right? So when we catch ourselves using these catchphrases, if someone's talking about gun control and they look at you and say, do guns kill people or do people kill people? You can be like, you just repeated a talking point that means absolutely nothing, and we're going to put on our defensive propaganda hats, and we're going to break down why that is really simply a rhetorical tool and does not actually get to any of the substance of the actual debate and the actual problems.
Well, that's a lot of what any propaganda is. It's keeping the conversation on surface level so nobody digs down. I would
say that's more specifically what the ladder of abstraction is for.
Yeah.
The ladder of abstraction as a technique is because if you're using ladder of abstraction, Hitler used the term extermination. He used the term... He used these very vague terms.
I don't find that vague.
Yeah. Or like... I'm gonna look it up later and have like that was the verb. But he and obviously it was in German. But he used verbs that were like weeding out these kind of like cleansing. We're cleansing. Obviously, this is murdering people.
Yeah.
On mass scale.
Yeah.
This is one of the greatest atrocities in human history. But he made it sound to a lot of people not as bad.
Less bad.
Because of his word choice.
Right.
And so we need to see through that.
Yeah.
We need to see through that.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And it's happening today.
Right. Okay. So I want you to share this in case people haven't seen the post. I'm going to link the post in the caption. This is the post that I helped with. But the alternative term. So it's pro-life and what was the term you used? It's not pro-life. It's.
I don't even remember.
I think you said anti-women.
Anti-women, yeah.
Yeah.
I think I said something. If you want to beat Republicans at their own game, you could call them anti-women or pro-hypocrisy, or I threw some.
There were some gems in there. I think some words in there. My personal favorite one was anti-women because that gets your brain like, oh, I don't like that.
It's better.
Anybody that loves a woman in their life is going to be
better
like,
copy.
Yeah,
it's better copy. Yeah.
But this all ties so beautifully.
By the way, I am a copywriter, so
Yeah,
if you're wondering
he's really
how this connects to my job, is I do this.
He
for
writes.
a living.
He writes for his life, but it's such a powerful kind of underpinning of the majority of the conversation is the importance of language and the importance of the words that we use because of how much power that they have. Like words are our most powerful tool.
Words are one of the main tools. We have other tools. Words are definitely one of the main tools we have to communicate. Like,
think of how, in communication, like, everything, like, think of how much damage we can inflict or progress we can create just by saying something. Like, I don't even have to physically harm you to harm you.
Yeah.
That's insane.
It's pretty crazy.
No other species has that. Like, Luna can bark and everybody's fine.
Nope.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, this is why I mean, one of the reasons I'm just fascinated with language. And I love almost everything that has to do with language. Yeah, so I've sort of dedicated my life to it in some ways.
I mean, that would make sense. Dedicate your life to, like, what you enjoy.
To something you enjoy, yeah. Yeah.
And you can do it in a multitude of... You can write about climate change. You can write about abortion. You can write about fitness bullshit. I know you don't love writing about fitness bullshit.
I've written a lot. I have some good fitness articles out there, actually. Maybe we can...
Give us your top, like, 3. And, yeah. And we'll link them.
I mean... One I really liked, and I compared it to a science analogy, where oh my god, I'm gonna totally butcher it.
I love that.
We might have to cut this part out.
I thought you loved failing.
Okay, so I train hockey players, and so I kind of like to steal ideas that NHL strength coaches have, and then put them in the article format. So one thing with hockey players we know is skating. Unlike sprinters, like land sprinters, is you use the stretch shortening cycle a lot more. So you know that bounciness that you get?
The rubber band.
The rubber band effect that I'm sure Emily's talked about.
I probably haven't because nobody cares that much
Nobody cares about sprinting and like athletic performance as much as... Yeah.
Nobody wants to hear me talk about the stretch shortening cycle.
Well, hockey players can't use that. So we have to move from not having as much strength to begin with. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That was wrong. We have to move without momentum.
Yeah.
Which means hockey players should train doing more jumps from a static position. So I call these static jumps. And I like that term because in strength conditioning, before I made that term, people said counter movement jumps and non-counter movement jumps. And I was like, you are going to confuse people.
You're like, this is a lot. This is a lot of syllables.
I think I call them static jumps and like bouncy jumps or something like that. It's like, they're like two simple terms. But yeah, I think that was a well communicated. It wasn't my idea. I've literally had not a single original fitness idea. I just take what NHL strength coaches do and just like...
And put it in a digestible,
try to put
form.
it in a more digestible form, which is why I work with them because they need support editing their articles to make them more digestible.
That's what you're here for.
And that's what I'm here for.
I love it.
Yeah, and it's also why I'm like, a lot of fitness companies have an easy time working with me because I speak the language of fitness and health and fitness and then can translate it into another form. So I kind of like to think of this as like kind of like a spectrum where you have like hardcore scientists because they think so analytically in these logical ways. Again, go back to like thinking and language because they're the way they self-talk and the way they think and just like the way their brains are wired in a lot of ways. It's very hard for them to explain this stuff. Yeah. And so you kind of need people along the spectrum. Right. That can take this layman, this expert, and bring them together. And that's not a new idea, obviously. Yeah. But I also think it's important to be aware of the risks of that because there's no such thing as translation. And ultimately, when you do that, things are going to be lost and misinterpreted. That's why we have a phrase called lost in translation. Yes. But it can be problematic in some ways. So like historical example is like how I wrote a paper on this in college in a persuasion class, is how we think about Cleopatra, and we would think like, oh, this is great. People have like distilled what the historian said and put it into this form, and now we think of Cleopatra in a certain way. And then you go back to the primary source and you're like, this is not at all what it says at all. And clearly things do get lost. So I think, yes, it's good to have those people in the middle. You need people like me, but you cannot just rely on me.
Right.
You cannot just rely on what I'm saying about static jumps and whatever. Yeah. You also should go back to the original sources at some point, which is like, oh, that's so overwhelming. It's like, well, learning, life. This is how it is. You gotta learn stuff. And I think it's empowering because it comes back to what we said at the beginning, which is el saber no ocupa espacio. Knowledge doesn't take up space. Yeah.
Beautiful.
So that spectrum, and then you have some amazing people like Andrew Huberman, who's kind of all of it.
I stand Huberman so hard. That's like my dream podcast guest. I'm going to put that in the universe.
We could probably make that happen, I'm sure.
Andrew Huberman follows David.
Andrew Huberman follows me on Instagram.
David.
We met once. We met
no
once.
Big deal.
Yeah.
Casual.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's my dream podcast guest.
That's my only name drop I have. I'm not.
Besides me.
I'm not well known at all. Nobody knows me, just him.
Now they do.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what is one area of learning anything that you don't naturally gravitate towards?
Ooh. I think there are areas I haven't explored. Okay. Like, I don't know anything about dancing or anything in that realm at all. Like, I was an athlete, so I have the athletics. So I am interested in physical learning. I think it's cool to have there's different types of learning, obviously, and physical learning is one of those buckets. I'm not a good dancer, nor have I ever learned how to dance, but I went to Miami for the first time on my US solo travel tour, and I was like, damn, I should learn how to salsa.
And our friend Brett knows how to dance.
He knows how to dance, and it kills for him.
Yeah.
So there are obviously, but every time, but I don't think I have those. I'm sure there are where I'm like, ooh, that's scary.
Yeah.
But because I kind of know this learning process, I'd be okay, like, why is it scary, and how can I lower the activation energy for all those things? And I'm usually excited to learn most things. There aren't that many things, so I'm like, there are things I have to accept I won't be able to learn, obviously.
Like what?
Can't learn every language in the world.
Yeah.
Would be awesome to speak Japanese and Chinese, and I would really love to learn some indigenous languages. And, I could, in theory, but you can't read every book, you can't learn every language, so that's just, woe's me. Poor David. Can't learn it all.
Can't learn everything.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah.
One question I'm asking everyone with the relaunch of the show is, what is, given the name Embody Radio, what is something you are working on embodying in your life right now?
I mean, it's like 100,000 things at once.
Catalan,
definitely.
Something we haven't already talked about.
Something that does not do language. I think, I'm a very externally driven person, in terms of learning. And I definitely, my mom is a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and so she is very, emotionally intelligent and kind of, without even me knowing, taught me these, good emotional tools. But I'm definitely, now, I think in the last year plus, I've gotten excited about, internal learning as well. And, people would call that the work, and I think that's we could talk about the rhetoric of that, which would be adjacent to our discussion, but I don't like using that term. I just call it internal learning. I think internal learning is something that I'm actively working on more in the last year, and taking breaks, obviously.
Yeah. I think that's so important when people are doing the work, or people hyper focus on quote unquote healing, and then they fuck themselves up. And that becomes your entire identity.
Sure. And I think that when you say I'm doing the work, it becomes binary. And again, how language affects how we are. When you say I've done the work, I've done the healing, I'm doing the healing, these are all you yes or no, A or B. And that's not how learning works at all. Right. And I think just the term to come, a big theme of this discussion is our word choices. Just the term for me, I'm doing internal learning. Yeah. To me, I'm it's like learning language. Yeah. I will never be as good at English as I want to be. I will never be good at Spanish as I want to be. I'll probably never be as good at Spanish as English. And that's just how learning is. Yeah. And that's how learning is. And
but you're still doing it.
That's why I like doing internal learning, because I have the expectations that there's always going to be learning to do and things to learn.
What are some of your favorite internal learning tools? For people
What's an example of an internal learning
tool?
So
one of my favorite ones is journaling.
Yeah. Yes, journaling. Obviously, I'm a writer. I have a journal for a lot of different purposes.
Same.
But yeah, I have
Same.
a journal. That's absolutely key. I think like having a few people in your life who you can talk to.
Yeah.
And it's the same as writing. It's like you need to like be able to get your ideas out in some way. Yeah. So shout out my therapist, Chrissy.
Love her so much. She's great. She's
really phenomenal.
We love that. Awesome. Well, this has been such a pleasure.
Yeah.
We covered a lot of... This is a vast landscape. Vast conversational landscape.
Plenty more topics. So I'm like, damn, that would have been interesting too. But yeah, this is super fun, Emily. I hope
this is so fun.
I hope you enjoyed it as well.
Love it. This is great. Actually, wait. I want you to end with one. Actually, sorry. I need to before we wrap this up.
You're gonna ask where people can find me?
No, I'll ask that in a second.
Great.
We'll give you the opportunity. Dating tips. David is a master dater.
Whoa.
You are the boldest. Maybe it's just because I suck. Like,
I don't know.
But you are very brave with
suppose.
the apps and like approaching people and like all of that. Dating in the modern world, if you will.
Sure.
2 to 3 tips for people that are
I'm entirely unqualified to do this.
You've gone on a lot of dates.
I have gone on a lot of dates. One, stop trying so hard. I think like I had this breakthrough in hockey where I was the stereotypical like hardest worker kid.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, wow, why are these kids who are like not working as hard getting better? And it's because you need to slow down to speed up, slow, smooth as fast, and all these things. And you could become a smoother skater by going back and doing these slow drills, working on your skating instead of going 100,000 miles an hour all the time. And I was a kid always going 100,000 miles an hour. And I think that translated to dating life as well, where I think if you're trying too hard, you might be like missing some of those slow, smooth as fast ideas. It also just makes it less stressful. And I think like you just need to be like literally just be relaxed. And so that's one.
So much easier said than done.
Way easier said than done. But I would break that down. So for hockey, it's like, okay, I need to do more power skating. I need to do stick handling slower, and I need to do it with less motion. And I need to do that skill development stuff at slow speeds before I could ever do it at fast speeds. And I think with dating, instead of trying to swipe, the equivalent of like just doing wind sprints would be like, I'm just going to swipe on all these apps all the time. It's like, okay, why don't you like next time you get a match, like instead of rushing through and just saying hey and trying to like reach out as many people as possible, maybe just like, what's a fun message? What do I actually, like focus on that one interaction and
nurture the lead.
Nurture the lead, I suppose. Yeah. I think, and I love dating apps because I have learned so much Catalan on dating apps, which is such a good language learning tip. If you want to learn how to write in your target language, start swiping because you got unlimited reps.
So go to a foreign country, download some dating apps.
There's no stakes. My Catalan has improved probably like a good chunk of it is from dating app conversations. Yeah. And number 2 is like, don't think about dating. Think of it like you're just like living life and having a conversation and being a normal person. Like I think when I connect with people, I'm never like, oh, I want to go talk to that person because I would love to achieve this thing of having sex with them. Like it's never like that at all. Like it's always
the
for
intention
me.
And like mindset.
It's always for me. I'm just like, this is a cool person. Like, or this, I'm just gonna like say hi and like, and if they don't say hi, I say okay, it's fine. And then if they do,
smile. How could they not say hi? This is so cute.
And then if they do, then I don't know. I just ask them like a question, and they ask me a question, and that's how life is.
That's your phrase. That's how life is.
And then you connect with the person because it happens naturally. I think, yeah. And I also I really hate pickup culture, and I think like it's hugely problematic. And I think like women deal with so much of just like guys constantly bombarding them with all these things, and I've tried to be the exact opposite of that. So if people don't look like they want to be approached at all, even if people do look like they want to be approached, I often err on the side of caution and just don't. I think like there's like I'm generally a collectivist person and think about more than just myself. Yeah. And I hate these pickup bros who are like, vibes. The worst thing a girl can be is when she's not thinking about you, like even if she hates, like some like
people say that,
some foul Andrew Tate energy, you know what I mean? So just don't be that. But I don't have any dating.
That was great. I even think just to chill the fuck out.
I'm not a good person to ask for dating advice.
That was great advice.
Okay. Well, I also wrote an article 2 years ago about dating apps. It's probably horribly outdated and reads like a
You should
21-year-old.
update it.
But I wrote it during the pandemic, so I think it's like how to date during a pandemic or something like that. I'm sure we
Ooh,
can.
I wanna read
I'm
it.
sure we can link to it.
I wanna read
it. It has
it.
a lot of SpongeBob references. That's what I do remember about
David
writing
loves
it.
SpongeBob. David always
I
has
also
a
have
SpongeBob
a whole
meme or a video clip.
I have a
ready to
whole
go.
article about persuasion and SpongeBob memes, so we could link to that as well.
You need to put all of these in one place.
They're all on my website.
Okay.
I have a website.
We'll give the website.
The
We'll
website
link
is
pick
my-
the top 3 to 5 articles, and then we'll link them in the show notes.
Okay.
Now is the opportunity. Plug away.
Okay.
Where can people find
Plugs.
you? Where
So-
can they subscribe to your emails? Where can they find your newsletters, your writing, your Instagram, all the bullshit?
So my name is David William Rosales. So I have a white ass middle name and a Spanish ass last name, and that's you can find me on Instagram. I don't really post on Instagram a ton, because I don't know. I should post on Instagram more, but I do write a lot, and so every month I send out a newsletter to, my subscribers, and it's long form, and I don't care how long it is. So if you aren't ready to read 2,000 word emails, then you don't have to subscribe. It's totally fine. But if you're interested in any of these topics, every month I just share an essay. So last month I shared the learning an endangered language essay. The month before that I talked about this amazing book I read in Barcelona and how it connected to creativity and writing. The month before that I wrote about probably was the ladder of abstraction one, and I wrote an Orwell one. And so it's a lot of things. There was a SpongeBob one. So every month it's just something I'm thinking about, and we can link to that. You can also just find my website, which is davidwilliamrosales.com. So either davidwilliamrosales.com on Instagram or davidwilliamrosales.com. I said .com for Instagram.
It's not .com.
It's not
It'll
.com
be
on
linked.
Instagram.
It'll be linked.
Yeah, I don't know. Just go to Emily's profile and you'll find me.
It'll
whatever.
all be linked in the
It's-
show
yeah.
notes because
But
he is a wonderful soul to follow.
You guys can say hi. I'm traveling the world currently, so my stories are just me bragging about like being in cool places. So
And going to punk shows.
if I also go to a lot of, we didn't talk about pop funk at all.
I know, I'm really sad.
Damn.
We're going to have to do a part 2.
Yeah, we're gonna have to do a part 2. And yeah, you guys can reach out to me, and I just want to say thanks, Emily, for having me on.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for being on.
Yep. Just me being awkward. That's all.
It's a Irish goodbye. You just got to be done.
Just end it. All right. Bye.
This is great,
everyone.
guys.